Alrighty, that takes us to 1 o'clock. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. My name's Georgia Pugh. I'm the program manager for AWI Extension Western Australia. And Catherine will introduce herself in a moment.
Thanks, Georgia. Hi, I'm Catherine Davies. I'm a Livestock Development Officer with DPIRD based in the Northern Office. I'd like to welcome you all to the DPIRD and AWI Extension WA webinar for sheep producers, Tackling Tough Times. The webinar is being recorded today and will be available online on the DPIRD and AWI websites afterwards. This two-part webinar aims to provide valuable information for producers so they can incorporate it into their decision-making for the coming season. We've got a number of speakers today, and there'll be the opportunity to ask questions of each of them throughout. Your cameras and microphones have been turned off for the presentations. However, as Georgia put in the chat, you can send through your questions through the chat function throughout each of the talks, or if prompted during question time with Georgia, you'll be able to unmute and turn on your camera and ask a question if you wish. I'd like to firstly start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country, the Aboriginal people of the many lands that we work on and their language groups throughout Western Australia, and recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters. We respect the continuing culture of Aboriginal people and the contribution they make to life of our regions, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So to start the presentations today, I'd like to first welcome Ian Foster. Ian's a Senior Research Scientist with DPIRD, and he will give us an idea of what season 2024 may have in store for us. Welcome, Ian.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Catherine. Given that we're short for time or tight for time, I will kick off immediately. I'll just go through three broad things, a quick recap of what's been happening to date, what the current seasonal climate outlook's looking, and a little bit of slight jargon about what the main climate drivers. That's just big picture things likely to be happening within the ocean, because that's coming up to be topical at the moment. A quick recap there, the charts showing rainfall to date. These are from the Bureau of Meteorology. These are decile maps where anything that's been, it looks at accumulated rain on the left chart for the last 3 months, that is January to March. The right-hand chart is actually the last 6 months from October last year. Anywhere that's white has been about normal within that period. Anywhere that's blue, you can probably work out that's been wet, and that's various tropical cyclone and other activities of the well inland. But the bit to note, apart from areas of the grain growing areas, the central wheat belt, most of the southwest and west coast has been much drier than average, particularly for the last 6 months. So that's since spring last year. There's been very little rain. It's now in the lowest 10% or less, even driest on record. So you're probably seeing that in terms of observations around the landscape. The overlay on top of all of that is that it's been very hot as well, hot and persistent easterly winds and those sorts of things. So that's where we've come from, where there's been very, very dry conditions across a lot of southern WA. Now that blue bit in the wheat belt is from those thunderstorms back in February and March, which took out power lines and a few other bits and pieces. But apart from that, it's been particularly dry. So the current outlooks, the Bureau of Meteorology and the range of other people can do shorter term outlooks looking at the next few weeks as well as the next few months or so. And these two charts from the Bureau of Meteorology's outlook, one on the left looking at the chances of exceeding median rain for April, and same sort of thing for May. They can slice and dice it and give you estimated amounts of rain from those sorts of things. But this, as a first pass, tells you the big picture. It'll come as no surprise to most people that there's pretty much Buckley's chance of getting above average rain for April. There's really not much until the end of the month at all. So that's going to continue the current conditions we've got. It'll cool a little bit, but it's going to stay dry. In May, the colours there, the sort of the beigey colours means you're getting back to about a neutral outlook, meaning it's about normal, but when we dig into it a little bit, the first part of May is still looking pretty dry. So the overall pattern is that we're not looking at an early start to the winter season. It's more likely to be average or a little bit later at this stage. So that's just what's showing on the monthly data. When you look at soil moisture, this is a quick update. And why this is relevant is really in terms of potentially impacts on perennials, but also potentially germination of pastures. This is from a Bureau of Meteorology webinar last week. Chart on the left just shows again the relative ranking of soil moisture at this time of year. If it's white, it says soil moisture is about average, which lots of times means it's not much. You see the red areas of the southwest and south coast, which implies that even for this time of year, there's a lot less soil moisture. And interestingly, the chart on the right is when they've run it through their forecast model as well and look at the predicted soil moisture. And that implies that even into May, the soil moisture deficits are going to continue, probably because it's looking at maybe significant rain not starting until the second half of May. So if you need soil moisture, and that in a sense is also can be translated into runoff, it's probably going to be a while before that'll happen. And you see the obvious bits of inland Australia has a lot of soil moisture, as you might expect from all the rain. So running into the next bit the models do is they do look at 3 monthly periods. They're overlapping. These were runs done last week. The chart on the left is again the same idea, just a simple chance of exceeding median for May, June, July. The good bit about that one is the white bits. The white bits means the model has no particular preference between wetter or drier, which means what you could expect to happen is what would have happened in your history. So the good thing about that is that even though it's not leaning towards wetter, there's a slight hint on the inland, it doesn't have a preference for drier. And if you look at a few of the other models, they're doing a similar sort of thing. So that bit's good. And when you look at the pressure patterns, you see an easing of the high pressures that have been dominating us until now. So that's potentially good. The bit on the right that's going to be persistent for a long time now is just the higher temperatures. And this just shows the chances of unusually high maximum temperatures during that period. And the way the colour coding is that if it's about normal chances, it'll be white. But those dark scab red bits, meaning you're looking at maybe 3 to 4 times likely to have unusually high maximum temperatures. And what I mean by that is in the top 20%. So the warm conditions we've seen are likely to continue right through that period. Now that, once you get into May and potentially June, it's likely to be, you might get some rain, but it could be warm as well. So any other particular implications coming from that? It might mean whatever pastures come up will germinate quite well because of the early vigour. Now, just coming towards the end a bit, the reason I put this chart up, this is just of predicted sea surface temperatures or differences from average from May to June, July from the Bureau's model. You'll see across there's red everywhere, which is one thing to note. That's been a feature this year, especially if you see in the very right in the Atlantic. It's been extremely warm there. So that's driving a lot of craziness around the world. You'll see just on the equator to the west of South America, a little tongue of sort of bluer temperatures. That means the region is cooler than average. That's a signature of a potential developing La Nina event in the Eastern Pacific. And if you look just to the west of Sumatra, you see a similar blue bit just appearing off Sumatra and off East Africa, the Horn of Africa, a red bit. Now, those two things there signify a particular mode of the Indian Ocean dipole, a positive mode, such as what happened last year. And it's very unusual to have these two things kicking off together, though it's not unprecedented. So this is the characteristic pattern that you may see mentioned in media or news reports about these two things developing. The caveat to this is that this is a time of year when the models are least skillful at looking at those sorts of things. So I mention that just so you note that even at this early stage, they're both in both regions, the model's expecting a potential La Nina event, which largely benefits Eastern Australia rather than us, but an Indian Ocean dipole positive event, which actually does have a bit of a suppressing effect from winter and spring on a lot of Australia. So having said that, it's just a thing to note at this stage. A lot of the models are saying the same thing. So as of last year, they were very consistent with their outlooks. So they're doing a similar thing this year. So just an item to note that those two big picture things may be developing, and that could be changing the outcome, especially maybe towards late winter and spring. So quick summary, last 6 months or so have been particularly hot and dry, not very nice. The rainfall outlook looks more likely to be drier than wetter for the next 2 months. It does seem to get better from May to July, but note it's likely to remain warmer than average. And those two events in the Pacific and Indian Oceans are there on the horizon. The predictability is not super good at this time of year, but it's just something to keep an eye on. And that's the end for me. Thank you, Georgia.
Thanks so much, Ian. If anyone has any questions for Ian, we have another minute or two to burn if anyone has any burning questions. Otherwise, you can shoot them through on the chat at any time. So feel free to come off mute and turn on your video if you'd like to ask a question. Feel free.
Ian, Emily Stretch here. I was just wondering whether there is a particular year that would be indicative of what we're seeing with the Indian Ocean dipoles that might be useful to look at with pastures from space.
There has been potentially back in, I think, 2008 or so. One of the problems with that is that because the climate's changing, what's happened in the past is not necessarily a good guide for the future. For example, the statistical relationships between the occurrence of El Niños or La Niñas and IOD events has been weakening in the last 20 years. It was much stronger before. So that means some of the ideas of looking at what happened in the past are actually becoming less useful now as the climate's changing. One of the reasons is just the general warmth everywhere throughout the oceans, and it is changing the atmospheric response to these things. So we are entering into new territory. That was the case last year when the La Nina seemed to take, the El Nino event seemed to take forever to develop, even though the models were saying it was going to happen, because there was warmth right across the Pacific Basin. So it's useful to have a look in the past, but it's not that much of a guide nowadays, just because these old relationships are starting to weaken. So whether we like it or not, these dynamical models are probably going to give us our best guides simply because they're capturing the current conditions rather than things that happened in the past. And even as more recently, within 20 years or so, it's becoming a bit less relevant because stuff's changing quite a bit now.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for that question. We will move on in the interest of time, but I'm sure Ian will be hanging around for a bit and might be able to answer any burning questions that come through on the chat as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Georgia. Our next presenter is Terry Melrose, who's a senior community educator with the Regional Men's Health Initiative, and he's going to talk about caring for our wellbeing during these challenging times. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Just real quickly, Regional Men's Health, we're a non-government organisation. We are funded through royalties for regions. And look, if you break down what we do real simply, we just see ourselves as, I suppose, that bridge of support and education to regional men. I do acknowledge there's quite a few ladies linked in here today, so we ignore the ladies at our own peril. Obviously, women are a very important part of our working lives, community, family, business. So a lot of events we go to, there is a mixed audience, and we pray that bridge of support, education. As I said, we deliver a whole range of wellbeing education sessions. We're out at shows and field days in our red utes doing the fast track pit stop, which is health awareness. And if I can just narrow down on that advocacy real quickly, we're not a clinical counselling service, but we do a lot of that short-term support and referral pathways. So we do like to see it. We're happy to be that point of contact for people, because it can be difficult navigating the system, especially when not only when it comes to a physical health issue, more so with our mental health. And then I suppose, as I'm going to touch on, throw in there the distress and uncertainty that everyone might be dealing with at this point. We can become a bit dysfunctional, and that system can be a lot harder. So we like to be that point of call or conduit for people to get the help they need. Real quickly, I show this picture in a lot of our education sessions. What comes to mind when we see that bloke out there? Is he going about his business quietly content, got his best mate on his shoulder, or has he got his head down? It's looking pretty dry, rough out there, and is he carrying the black dog, the weight of the world on his shoulders? But I suppose what this session's about is, if we don't have a conversation, if we don't ask him, if we're not honest with ourselves how we're going, we don't really know. So this is just a little bit about how I'm going, having that little check-in for you, but also a few things to be aware of and what to look out for in those around us. We just have to acknowledge, mental health isn't a dirty word. We all have it. We all need it. It's great if we could focus on just the being well, the good parts of our mental health, but we know it operates on a whole continuum. And we just have to acknowledge mental health encompasses all aspects of our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So what's that mean? Mental health impacts how we think, how we act, and how we feel. And look, we do know, stress is a pretty overused word these days. We've got to normalize stress. Stress is what helps us, I suppose, to perform during those difficult or busy times. But we know when stress is excessive, we don't get a release. When things compile, we can become distressed. That distress leads to dysfunction. And you think about all the things that happen in daily life, like old mate up there, people living and working in country, regional, rural, remote communities have huge capacity to deal with a whole range of stresses. But it's quite often, those seasonal adversities that come out of the blue, the things we may not see coming. And obviously, quite often our biggest stresses are the things we have the least control over. So while it's pretty easy for me to say this, but quite often we do just have to bring it back to what we have control over, breaking things down into manageable tasks. And also just the importance of communication, communication within our inner sanctum, the family, the community, but then also who's outside of that, within our business, our advisors, that team. Because quite often we do see when things are going pear-shaped, quite often blokes, we know what the issues are, but we don't want to show ourselves as the only one with a problem. And sometimes blokes can be like that fox amongst the hounds, when you're in deep shit, say nothing and try to look like you know what you're doing. And it is normal to withdraw and go in and problem solve. But I suppose the longer we stay in there, we remove ourselves from sometimes the best and freest forms of support or community. That exacerbates risk factors for our mental health and well-being. Things around loneliness, uncertainty. We can sometimes take unnecessary risks with our relationships, our family, and then that can exacerbate those feelings of loneliness and isolation as well. So like I mentioned before about our mental health and well-being, a little bit of mental health 101 here. It is on a continuum. Quite often we sort of think that when things go pear-shaped, industry wants to put us into the red, that we've got a mental health problem or a mental illness. But what we're referring to here, and we've got to normalize people's reaction to difficult times, challenging times, that we can go into a space of situational distress. And this is normal. We've got to talk about it. And the onset, when we talk about a bit of a mental health check-in, looking out for those changes, body, mood, and behavior. How do we know when stress is becoming excessive or we're becoming a bit dysfunctional? So look, there's 10 little things here to look out for. This is, we refer to this as our shocky sheet. It's based on the K10, a stress tool sometimes doctors will use to help diagnose depression. But I think if we talk about these things and try to break down, what's happening in my life, is my sleep being affected? Having those unexplained temper outbursts. Maybe, we're feeling hopeless about our immediate future. A big one, I suppose, what we're trying to point out today is that feeling trapped or stuck. And that's about, I suppose, that decision-making when we can become a bit dysfunctional. That brain fog, decision-making can be difficult. We can lose interest in things we normally like or enjoy. Once again, bringing those, what do I have control over? My little mantra when life's getting pretty stressful or difficult, if I can control my exercise, my sleep, and have a good diet, my functioning, my decision-making is a bit easier if I'm controlling those three things. Once again, it's not going to affect some of those bigger issues or decisions, but the better headspace we can be in, the better, I suppose, we're equipped to deal with those difficult times. And like that last one there, I'm unable to get rid of bad thoughts and ideas. Sometimes in psychology or mental health, it's sort of people just think, oh, you just got to be positive, put a positive spin on it. But I think more importantly than that is challenging that negative or unhelpful thinking. This always happens to me, or I've stuffed up again. Why did I do this? And challenging that negative or unhelpful thinking is really important, because we do know the longer we stay in that distress state, we talk about cortisone and all the hormones and chemicals that are released in stressful times are good, as I said, to help us perform at a peak or optimal performance in the short term, but over the long term, that can affect our body, how we think, how we feel. Obviously, looking out for things, conflict within our business or our family, and that reckless risk taking. So look, just to finish on decision making, I think is one of those things. If we're in a position to make a decision, we say it's a good thing. We've got to understand there's people on a whole different range of scales or poles in life. Some people are that quietly confident, sure of themselves, like to be in control and to take situations head on and make a decision. While others of us, are a little bit more indecisive. We need to seek that advice or approval first. We need a little bit more time to make decisions. So just being aware in yourself, some factors that can influence our decision making. Obviously, there's always uncertainty. None of us want to make the wrong decision. That fear that is around decision making. Obviously, in farm business, there's a whole lot of complexity, interrelated factors that need to be considered. What are the consequences? This can be both positive and negative, but quite often we need to consider the risk versus reward. And then alternatives. If we're shutting ourselves off, thinking we're the only one with a problem, sometimes that communication opens us up to a whole lot of different things, options that are available to us. And then that, we're all different. We all have different families, business structures, community dynamics. How do we feel about what others will think of us around our decisions? What else is going on in our lives that might impact that? So it's really important just to be aware of a few of those little things. There's a whole lot of supports and services out there. As I said, we're happy to be that point of call to help navigate the system, or just be a third party. You've got Rural West, the old Rural Financial Counselling Service, a free independent financial advisors or financial counsellors for farm or rural business. Rural Aid is another option there for counselling and support. Fodder. And I think, Catherine, we spoke about a really good resource that might probably be emailed out that's got links to a whole lot of supports and services. But look, check out our website. We've got some podcasts on there, a whole range of information, video for people to link into. We're available for communities to do a little social gathering to help reduce some of that isolation, get people together. We've got a little bit of funding that can help out. So it's just a matter of getting in contact with the office. And look, never underestimate that power we can make as individuals in other people's lives. Quite often we don't need training to have that conversation with someone about how they're going. Asking the question, showing a bit of care and empathy, following up, and we can make a difference. But yeah, look, guys, everyone out there, look after yourselves. And if there's anything further we can do to assist, get in contact. If you Google Regional Men's Health, we come up pretty quick on the old Google search.
Thanks so much, Terry. We will open it up to any questions. Otherwise, of course, use the chat or reach out using those links that Terry mentioned. And we're happy to share those around later as well. But thanks very much, Terry. Super terrific to get that check-in at the moment. There's a lot going on with everyone, lots of challenges out there. So it's really terrific to get that support and awareness of what's out there for us. Now, Catherine, I think will take us into the next section.
Thank you. So if we haven't got any questions there, thanks very much, Terry. Hopefully, out of these stressful times, there might be some opportunities to help refine your breeding objectives and keep track of going towards breeding your perfect sheep. So we've got Mark Ferguson here, CEO of NextGen Agri, and he's going to speak with us a bit about that today. Over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Catherine, and yeah, thanks all. Thanks, Georgia. Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I guess in no way am I making light of the situation there in WA, but I guess it's an opportunity to talk about, I guess, the approaches you can take in these times in terms of on the genetic front as well, and what I guess, I mean, farming's always been uncertain and it isn't getting any less so, but I guess what are the concepts that sort of are across all sort of sheep breeding, I guess, is what we want to cover today. I guess more than ever before, these are the times where there's no room for those leaky taps in breeding programs, and everyone's got them. Everyone's got some wastage in their breeding programs, whether it's a set of rams that were bought cheaply, or some terminals that you haven't really thought about too much that you've bought, or some ewes that sort of just chip away. I mean, every farm has good sheep and bad sheep, and it's that natural balance that we work with. I guess I just want to talk about today about some of the concepts of how we minimise that wastage, and we accept it's going to be there always, but how do we make sure we've got the best farming with the best sheep we can. I guess I sort of run on the theory that if you're going to farm with sheep, you may as well farm with good ones, and that's sort of how we roll. But and I guess what that means in my head, at least, is reaching a tight fit between the production environment, the perfect sheep for you, because it could be different between you and your neighbour. It often is different, not because the rain's more on your side of the fence or less, or however that works, but more because of the way you run those sheep, the stocking rate you like to run them at, the type of animal that you prefer, the type of wool you prefer, whether it's got wool or no wool. So every individual has their own sort of target in their head, and I guess what I would ask you to think about in these, even though it backs against the wall a little bit in some perspectives, but it is an opportunity to sit back and go, well, what would be the perfect sheep for this farm if I didn't have those ewes running around on my farm? What would I actually, if I started from a blank sheet of paper, what would that look like? And what I would encourage you to think about is the combination of traits that would be best for your environment, or the best for it's more than your environment. Your environment is how you farm your sheep and your area, and it's more than just where sort of what I would encourage people to do. And I guess when we are thinking about the sort of not really new concepts, but I guess just a way to think is define it. Often we've got these sort of loose terms or there's loose concepts of what the sheep we're farming with, but just sort of farming with sheep. And I know that many of you will have 70 or 80% of your income coming from crop, so sheep aren't a massive part of your enterprise, but others will be more sheep dominant. But being really clear about what it is you want those sheep to do, and I guess in doing that, thinking more than just kind of what it has been or what it and more about what they could be. So thinking about, like, if I could definitely define this sheep that meant that I wasn't out there with a drench gun, or I wasn't out there chasing flies, or what would that actually look like? Because there's a lot of traits that if you look through the information these days, there's a lot of things out there that we can actually breed sheep to take labour out of the system, or change the way we farm with the genotype that we deploy. So I would encourage you to, when you're doing that definition, to think, I guess, deeper than what might be just to cut big, heavy fleece weights of great wool that's 17, 18 micron and get some lambs off at 30 kilos, or whatever that sort of loose terms might be. But think hard, I guess, deeper about that. And then we're going to go through each of these in order. But so I guess, yeah, just sort of cover that a bit. But defining your perfect sheep is about more than just those make your money traits. So you will have heard me, if you've heard me talk at all, you will have heard me say these things. But the way we approach sheep breeding is more than just how do I make money out of these sheep, which is wool and lambs and mutton, and more about, well, how do I take cost out of this business? So the traits that save you money, the traits that save you time, and the traits that delight a customer are ways that we think about that breeding objective when you're defining that sheep. Because often we only ever think about the make your money traits when we're thinking about genetics, which is more fleece weight or more lambs or more wool or more growth. So if we think of the make your money traits, they are the obvious ones: lambs, wool, carcass, growth. They're all the obvious ones to make you money. You will all have them sitting in your perfect sheep, one of those or one or two of those at least. And they're good things to have in there. I'm not saying you don't need to make money. Obviously, that's the priority, but then it's the other traits to think about. So save your money traits, and these I think are big ones that we need. If we think about farming in variable times, those four things on the screen now are well and truly up there, and there's others you could put up there, and you'll have different ones for your objective as well. But condition score, so feeding sheep less or feeding them later into the season, or stopping that feeding a bit earlier. DAGs is really heritable, and some great work done by predominantly Western Australian scientists around fly strike and the susceptibility to fly strike and the variation around that. DAG being a big driver of that in the south of WA for sure. Mature size, so how do we moderate our sheep? Early growth, but not taking them to too big. And then feed is something that we've got a few projects on, or one in New Zealand and one in Australia, trying to make sure we're breeding sheep that have sound feed. So they're all things that probably are reasons that you got out of sheep or wanted to get out of sheep at some point, or your neighbours have. Some of those things are often when you ask people why they got out of sheep, a lot of those things come up. So we can actually have select against those traits, or select for animals that are better for those traits. Similar stuff, save your time, save your money is a similar sort of thing. Money is time, but worms, again, some great science out of Western Australia that we've got really resistant sheep now. So we've got drenches failing across Australasia really, and worm resistance in the sheep is going to be a critical way around that. Wrinkle will depend on what your stance is on that, but obviously as an industry we're getting plainer, and that's around fly susceptibility. Fleece rot, we've done a lot of work recently on wool colour and rot. Seasons where summer rainfall is maybe more, or is expected to be more common, then things like fleece rot and body stripe become predominant. And again, they're under genetic control, and we've done a lot of work scoring that in the last couple of years, and we're now finding sheep that are really resistant to wool colour and fleece rot. But if we don't look for it, we don't find it. And so I guess these are all trying to get you to expand maybe what those couple of things would be around a breeding objective. And then if you're buying terminals, then birth weight's a key one as well. We want to be high growth but low birth weight and good lambing ease in our terminal selection. And again, a lot of people just buy a terminal ram because it's cheap or just to get one, but there's a lot of variation in those as well, and you should be deploying that on deploying the same principles on those terminal rams. These are, I guess, traits depending on where you sit on the delighted customer front. But IMF or marbling has obviously been a big thing in the media for a long time, and it is true that better marbled meat tastes better, and keeps a consumer happy. But equally, if you in the south, you could be sending it well into an Italian market, so crimp becomes important, or micron becomes important for some of you. Polar horn, depending on where the consumers are. We now, in some parts, you're not meant to take horns off without veterinary supervision, so poles are becoming much more common. So all these things are things that you consider, and I'm not at all being prescriptive here. It's about encouraging you to think about all of the traits that make up a sheep, and all the things that make you happy about a sheep, and all the things that annoy you about sheep, and try to work out which of those have a genetic component. And the reality is everything down to their eyelash length has a genetic component. So you can change anything about your sheep, and I always have my standard line of don't blame the sheep, you bred them, which is true. We tend to say, well, those sheep are this or they're that, but we're the ones that have put those genetics together on our farms often. So kind of the blame does land with the person buying the rams or selecting those ewes. Moving on into that plan. So once you know what that sheep is and you've sort of written down, and there's a couple of tools on our website if you want to grab them to download them and help you through that process. Establishing the baseline is next. And if you're in the merino game, which lots of WA are, the flock profile test is a really good way to establish that baseline. 20 genotypes, 20 DNA samples off your young ewes, sent away, come back with the average breeding value of your flock. It's not 100% accurate, no breeding value is, but it does give you a really good read on your strengths and weaknesses. And it's going to be a little bit of investment in a year that you probably don't have a lot to invest, so it might not be for this year. But when good times do return, I would encourage you to do a flock profile test if you're serious about shifting your sheep in a better direction or changing the genotype. Then getting a good handle on where they are now is a lot of commercial producers that we've worked with have found that really informative. So that's something you can do. There's a Western Australian company, Zydavet, which I'll have the samples. Any of the team online today can help you with that. Out of that is a ram buying plan. We won't talk about that much today. We're sort of a bit out of ram buying season, but working out what the traits you're focusing on, who's good for those traits in industry, what's the discussion you're going to have with your ram breeder about the traits that you're trying to work on, so you can give them a good read on the type of sheep you'll be buying in the future. I think we have way too few conversations with our ram breeders. We sort of expect them to kind of be mind readers and work out what we want and provide the rams we want, and half the time we haven't actually told them what we want. So definitely, we won't go into that today, but definitely look into think about where you're getting those rams from and that conversations you're having with them. You can, again, it's a free resource our website. You can download it. You can get a hard copy from the team as well, but it goes through every trait by trait to help explain a lot of those traits in a bit of detail to help you get your head around. And then I guess if we think in times like this, when a lot of this has already happened, a lot of the flock has already you've already been through with your cull stick a fair bit. We're into pregnancy, but when we are thinking about the ewe selection strategies, we do need to ensure we're doing a good job on our ewes as well as the rams we're buying. I see a lot of people who will cull ewes in a particular way and then buy rams in a different way. That's not helpful. If you've got to be consistent with what you're doing on your ewes with what you're doing on your rams. And I guess in tough times or variable times, there's two things that I think about, and one is like the genetic merit of the sheep you're taking into that tough time. So what are you going to cull down to? What's the minimum type of sheep you want to cull down to? But equally, what's the set of sheep which will bounce me back out of these tough times the quickest? So while your young ewes should be your best genetics, they're the slowest to get you back to fighting weight because they have less lambs that first year. So sometimes they're the ones that should go. So in terms of order of priority, if you are looking at culling down sheep, I think the oldest age group go first, then the least productive from all age groups, then the youngest age group because they won't bounce you out of the tough times, and then the second oldest age group is the kind of way that I think about it, but that'll depend on each individual farm. But think about what is not just what are my highest value sheep, but also which of my sheep that are going to get me back up to numbers quicker, and often that will your mid-range age ewes because they'll have the most lambs and respond the quickest to better times or to better seasons. One thing that we encourage is getting some measurement around that. I won't go into that because we don't have time today, but just be careful. We often see people saying, right, well, I'm going to measure something on my sheep, so I'll measure fleece weight and fibre diameter. The problem with that is that will enforce you to select for singles and encourage you to select for singles, the same as commercial. If you go through on cull sheep, you predominantly pick singles as your keepers because they look a bit shinier and they have slightly more wool that's finer. And the same thing if you measure those sheep. The twins are always stronger micron and cut less wool than singles. So be careful when you start introducing measurement into. If you're going to bring measurement into the equation, make sure you do it holistically. Get weights in there, get condition scores in there, get some of these DAG scores and some of these other things in there because just the wool traits alone can lead you down a track that you might not have intended to go down. I won't go through these graphs directly, but again, I've just said that. But basically, the twins are always stronger than singles, so they're higher micron, less fleece weight, so they have less value in terms of fleece value. But that doesn't mean they're less value on the farm. That's where all the trade-offs come off. How are we going for time, Catherine?
Got 5 minutes, I think. All good, mate.
Oh, cool. All right. Thank you. So to counter that, when you are classing those sheep and you are going through your ewes, what I would love to see, and I guess one of the outcomes is going to be of mandatory EID, is that we're going to have these are kind of bits of information that will be easier to collect. But making sure we're classing sheep singles with singles, twins with twins, maidens with maiden singles, and maiden twins. If you're classing sheep in those groups, you are less likely to be sort of accidentally selecting against twins because Brom and Clark showed it beautifully. Not sure if I put the slide in or not in the end, but it might come up next. No, it didn't. There's some good work out of Western Australia that showed that anyone who classes sheep without information in front of them will accidentally pick a lot more singles than twins. So in the culls, there was 70% of the culls were twins and 30% were singles, and the opposite was true in the singles. And so because of a range of factors, we prefer to look at single-born progeny, and our eye is drawn to them if they're mixed. So to protect yourself against that, you want to be separating them out. And so we've got people who do that through just an ear notch, with the singles get an ear notch, or the twins, depending on which is the highest number. As we move into EID, you can record that on the mobs or whatever. But that, I think we've done some good by introducing measurement into the industry over years, but sometimes we do bad as well by sort of we'll improve our fleece weight and our fibre diameter, but we might decrease our robustness and decrease our reproduction because we've selected for early singles out of older ewes essentially by doing that. So it's a holistic thing, and I think that's hopefully if there's one message out of this talk, it's always about balance. There's no single trait that makes you money. It's about building this set of sheep out there that turn pasture into money, and that with the minimum labour requirement, the minimum cost possible is sort of the focus of your sheep breeding. And then I guess allocating sufficient resources to do that. One of the things that stops people doing that is time. And I know that, again, time is, I've never found a farmer that tells me they've got a bit too much time on their hands. They need looking for a new hobby. It does take a bit of extra time, but I guess in terms of the biggest bang for buck will come from the rams you buy. So putting an extra half a day into the thinking about that ram catalogue before you turn up to that sale is time well spent. The next value would be coming from that ewe selection process. And again, there's a few key things a few key dates. If you make sure you know who's a single, who's a twin, and use that information properly, you can save yourself. You can make a lot of value out of that investment of time. But yeah, I guess part of that plan is working out what it is you want to achieve and making sure there's resources available for it. If there's no resources available, as in you don't have time, then get someone else to do it, or accept that you're not going to be at the top of the tree in terms of genetics of sheep, and that's fine. That's a business decision. If it's not the highest priority thing on your business, that's just it is. But don't go into it spending half the money or half the time. You either sort of do it to the best of your ability or pretty well, or you're better off just investing your time in buying those rams as best you can. And I think the final thing to talk about is don't change with the markets. I know you've been beaten up a lot over the last 12, 24 months in Western Australia, with prices, wool down now, meat's been down. Who knows what's going on with live shipping, all that sort of stuff. One of the things I would encourage you to do is try and look long term. And I know that's really tough right now, but what does 10 years look like in the industry? And some of you are going, well, that's a grim thought. But others are going, well, protein's still in demand, wool will come back, things are going to be good again. And that being said, yeah, your perfect sheep has to be what you think it could look like in 10 years, and then try and stick to it. Don't say, well, this year wool's good, so I'll increase my selection pressure on fleece weight. Next year it's back, so I'm going to go more on growth. The more you can be consistent and have a consistent process year in, year out, and change that goalpost as required, but consistency is key because it's a slow game. It's not the first thing you would do in terms of business recovery. Genetics is a bit slow, but it is an insanely powerful tool. And I think until you've seen the true power of genetics, you kind of won't believe how it can change your farming system, but you'll need to be consistent. That's it for me. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Really appreciate that. It's helpful for us all to be thinking about these things. We've had a question come through on the chat about clarifying the point you made about twins being better or worse for wool quality.
Yeah, so secondary follicle, anyone who's done lifetime ewe management over there, which a few of you have, secondary follicle development happens the last 60 days of pregnancy. In twin-born lambs, there's less secondary branching, less secondary follicles develop. So therefore, there's less fibres produced. So you get less wool, and it's like trees in a forest. The sort of less density means you have, they end up being bigger. So you end up, because there's less follicle density in twins, you end up with less wool that's stronger. That's not genetic. They will then go on and breed like their genetics say they will, but phenotypically that'll be the way they are. So if we're just selecting only on those two traits in a group of sheep we know nothing else about, we will predominantly we'll favour the selection of singles over twins because of those two factors, if that's all we're measuring.
Thank you. If anyone else has a question and wants to send it through on the chat or come off video and put your video on and come off mute, feel free to jump in. We've got a minute for that if need be. Otherwise, thank you very much, Mark, for attending today. We really appreciated you giving that talk and giving up your time. And I'll hand over to Catherine to move us on to the next speaker. But thank you very much, Mark.
Thanks all.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Georgia. Just confirming there's no one else that wants to jump in and ask a question. No. All right. Right. So next up, we have the Managing Director of the Livestock Collective, Holly Luderman, who's here to bring you the latest from what they have been up to. Thanks, Holly.
Thanks, Catherine. Great to be here and part of this presentation. Just giving a brief update today on what the Livestock Collective's been up to and how we're working with the AWI Extension team over the coming year. For those of you that don't know us, we're a non-for-profit organisation, been working for 5 years now, and really started off with a focus around informing the general public around livestock practices, especially in the sheep industry in WA, and then moved into more capacity building and leadership workshops as well. And so for us, the core of both of those activities drives community acceptance in agriculture and specifically the sheep industry. So we do that a number of ways. We've worked through our communication projects, our kind of events and out and about projects, and through our capacity building workshops. And there's a link to our website in the chat if anyone hasn't been there. We do a lot of social media and media engagement as well. The public-facing events could be things like being at the Perth Royal Show, feedlot and vessel tours, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about, or our specific capacity building workshops. So recently we have partnered with AWI, and that agreement is to help develop a tailored program that focuses on capacity building in the wool and sheep industry, and do that project alongside the AWI Extension team, which is really focusing on the specific extension needs of growers. And we really wanted to define the needs of levy payers across WA, and those can be different in the different regions, having such a vast state. And another key outcome for us was to really ensure that all levy payers have access to engagement and opportunities from AWI, and having such a large state with people that are, mixed growers, not all purpose sheep producers, it's important that we provide resources in different modalities. So not everybody wants to attend a field day, and hopefully things like this webinar and podcasts we reach a wider group of levy payers through those different methods. So one of the first projects we've worked on with AWI is surveying producers. And if anyone hasn't filled out the survey, you still have time. And that information is used to help feed back to both the AWI Extension Network and ourselves in our capacity building projects. And generally, we've split the state up into 3 different zones. As you can see by the responses there, and the eastern zone is generally the towns south of the Great Eastern Highway, and the western zone is generally the towns west of the Great Southern Highway. And that's kind of because we have the different growing regions and potentially different types of production systems. I think it's important that we help have different extension and different capacity building projects in those zones. So the survey, we've had over 250 respondents, is used to help provide information back to AWI for extension and for us, and what growers need or want, and what they're doing well and where they need more help. The survey was kind of split up into production type questions, confidence questions, and communication questions, which I won't go through in detail, but that information is informing future projects and things like this webinar. Interestingly, from the communication type results, we'd found, or were informed, that growers are interested in attending tour days and feedlot and wool tours, which we've run a few, and we'll continue to advertise those. And that's a great opportunity for people that can get down to the Perth region and want to see those things firsthand. There was also some good interest in attending things like Q&A sessions and webinars like these, and I think these are really useful as they can be re-listened to and re-watched. So while people are seeding or harvesting, if they're mixed growers, they can be catching up on the latest information and sessions like we've just heard from the speakers today. As far as communicating directly with producers, it's 50% of people still really value being communicated through email, and then some people like following social media pages, websites, or a combination of those things. And I think that reiterates the purpose we were really looking towards, which is to make sure we offer a maximum number of modalities to ensure that levy payers have access to information. When asked what people wanted more of, that was good to see that people wanted to know more about ag technology trends and wool harvesting information. So some of the exciting things that AWI is doing, and we can help get that information out. So some of the things that producers weren't as confident about was around EIDs and ASBVs, and I know we've just had a presentation about the impacts that careful selection can have, and NextGen Agri does an amazing job in that space. EIDs is something that the National Task Force is looking at, and I know DPIRD is working as part of that project as well. So that is something that there's obviously just that uncertainty, and that was good to get that information, and we can use that in both the extension projects and the capacity building projects. It was good to see that there is high confidence in achieving good conception rates, managing fly strike, and that probably reflects, the excellent focus and extension programs that have been present in the past around WA. Sorry, slight delay. So we have been out and about using that survey information as part of the program, being at events, presenting at events, and running our feedlot and wool store tours. And that's been really rewarding for us to engage with various producers in the different zones, and we continue to try and make sure we can spread that I suppose resources across the different zones as efficiently and effectively as we can. As well as our, out and about, we've used that information around people liking podcasts and hearing from various people in the supply chain. And we've got our Behind the Collective podcast, which is specifically got a few episodes which will be part of this partner program. So we've got, focus on shearing, Scott Carmody talking about the wool market, and then the most recent podcast, which will be released soon, from Laura Armstrong from AWI, is amazing, hearing about how our wool is marketed internationally and the incredible work that goes on behind the scenes that I think is really important for levy payers to hear, and that'll be a great one to look out for. As well as our podcast, we'll be doing webinars ourselves as well in collaboration with the WA Extension team and NextGen Agri. So we've done, an introductory webinar and a webinar with Scott Carmody, again, talking about the influencing factors on the wool trade. And we've had a great webinar with Dr. Michaela Seal, who many of you will know, and talking about that kind of grassroots disease investigation and vaccination strategies, which is really important on farm. And those webinars will be, again, pre-recorded so that they can be available offline for people. And from the feedback we've heard, I think that's a great resource to be able to share with producers. Another focus we've just started is working with Sheep Producers Australia on the EID task force, and there'll be a separate section of webinars and podcasts available for producers around that EID implementation, and some case studies on people that have done it. And, there are different opinions around that, and there'll be the good, the bad, and the ugly discussions in that space, which I think is important for us to have during this transition time. So on that note, I think I've taken up my 10 minutes, and that was just a brief update on what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it's really great to work with the extension team. You can contact me anytime, info@thelivestockcollective.com.au, and our team is made up of volunteer directors, and then we've got our 3 key personnel, Kate, Tiffany, and Marion Lewis, who's been a key part of this project. Thanks, Georgia and Catherine.
Thank you very much, Holly. We'll open up to questions. If anyone wants to come off, put their video on and come off mute, feel free to jump on or shoot something through on the chat. Otherwise, we're super stoked to have you as part of the presenters today, Holly. Thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to doing more together and across the year ahead. So thanks a lot for your time. And if anyone has any questions through, I'm sure Holly will be around for a few more minutes if you want to shoot that through on the chat. Thank you very much. Now, I'd like to wrap up today's session with just a bit of an update from AWI Extension WA. And for those of you who need to bounce, that's fine. But if you could hang around for a few more minutes, I'd really appreciate it. We've got a quick survey we'd like you to complete just to give us some feedback from today. So please hang around for a few more minutes if you can. So I wanted to draw everyone's attention to some upcoming events that AWI Extension WA we're in the process of organising. So these will be in the form of in-person workshops. In July, we're looking at running the Simplify, which is the strategic fly strike management workshop. So I really encourage you to look out for when that registration link comes out and attend that. And then also in July, we're looking at running Ramping Up Repro as well. So how to get the best performance from your RAMs. In August, September, look out for the Winning with Wieners workshops to work on your feed budget tables and from Merino Weathers and more. And also another few sessions on the Ramping Up Repro. So please look out for those upcoming events and continue to register and let us know if you ever have any questions or if you ever got any suggestions of where to hold some of these workshops or partners to have on those workshops. So please keep that in mind. Please keep in touch and stay up to date. You will have seen the Facebook profile for AWI Extension WA's rebranded and relaunched. So that's all up and running, and hopefully you're getting the content out through there and also on Twitter or X, as we should now call it. But please get in touch if you ever have any feedback or any suggestions. We'd love to stay in touch. There's our website, awiextensionwa.com, and email address there as well. And don't forget to subscribe. We'll be releasing quarterly newsletters, so make sure you subscribe. And if you've subscribed in the past, then that subscription would have ticked over. Now, just quickly wanted to point you in the direction of additional support and resources coming on from today's theme of tackling tough times. I will leave this up there for a moment if you want to take a photo. Otherwise, we'll make this available later. But there's certainly resources out there for WA farmers on funding and support and season information. So please check those out. And also rural support services too for the current season. Thank you for everybody who was able to attend today. Catherine will launch a quick survey. It should take you literally 30 seconds. So really appreciate it if you could just answer the couple of questions to give us some feedback from today's session. But on behalf of DPIRD and AWI Extension WA, we'd really like to thank you for coming. Please join again tomorrow at 1 o'clock again for another 1 hour session. We've got a really exciting lineup of speakers tomorrow as well, in a condensed, compact session of information. So knowledge is power. So we really appreciate you joining us today. And if any of your friends or neighbours wanted to catch up on this, we will be releasing the recording as well. So thanks again all for attending and for all the speakers today. We really appreciate it. Thank you.